Chapter 11. Daniel had convinced the others to join his softball team a year ago, and they were getting ready for a game now. Their team, the Unstoppable Titans, hadn't won a game this season, however. Alyssa met everyone in the garage. They were all wearing matching red shirts with the team name etched in black. They arrived at the field 15 minutes later, meeting up with the rest of the team in the dugout. They were playing against the Turtles Who Are Terrible today. Daniel practiced catching with Owen before the game, though he couldn't play on account of his broken arm. "You ever think about getting your diploma?" he asked Owen. "Sometimes. I should go back to school before it's too late. I'm not getting any younger." "It must suck never having experienced high school like the rest of us," Daniel said. "Yeah, well, at least I got my freshman year out of the way. I mean, I just left Cullen's house and went straight to downtown. High school just doesn't seem like a priority now." Yeah, Daniel said with fake annoyance. "We all know the story." Owen thought, not for the first time, about what his life would have been like had his father not been killed. Would he still have met Chris and the others at some point? Would he have ever encountered any monsters? The attacks didn't start in the city until after Owen arrived. He liked to think that was a coincidence, however. "What brought this up?" Owen asked, knocking himself from his reverie. "I don't know," Daniel said, looking at the sky. "I just think you should finish high school or get your GED. That's all. I mean, we're not going to be fighting monsters forever." "What do you mean?" Owen asked. Daniel looked thoughtfully at Owen now. "We're not always going to live together, the four of us. Eventually, we'll go our separate ways, start families, etc. I don't want that to happen, but it will. I just think you should be prepared when it does." As Owen threw the ball back to Daniel, he ignored the other's words and instead remembered the day he found out he had super strength. It had been out on this very field. The team had been warming up when Owen accidentally threw the ball too hard. Daniel had reached up to catch it and had been pulled into the air by the force. Luckily, no one else had seen this except Alyssa and Chris. It had been a pretty exciting day. Today's game started a few minutes later. Chris was up to bat first. The pitcher, a dark-haired boy in his teens, threw the ball underhand. Chris knocked it into right field and made it to first base. Alyssa ran up to bat. She knocked the ball far into center field. Chris was able to make it to third base. Alyssa was right behind him on second. A blonde-haired boy in his late 20s stepped up and hit a home run. When it was the Titans' turn in the outfield, Owen was pitcher. Up to bat for the Turtles was a tall blonde guy in his early 20s. Owen couldn't remember his name, but he knew that the guy had a short temper. Owen had heard a rumor the guy had punched a hole in a microwave once because it wouldn't work properly. The guy was now pointing his bat right at Owen, indicating that was where the ball was going. Owen grinned. There was no way this sucker was laying anything on his pitch. Owen wound up and then pitched as hard as he could. There was a loud clap as the bat connected, sending the ball straight at Owen's head. There was a sickening smack, and he fell on his back. Everything went dark. Owen was surrounded by green lights and the familiar humming sound as he placed a furry slug onto a silver work table. It only squirmed a little, but stayed at the center. He then reached for the orb, which was on another table. He ran his long, pale fingers delicately along its surface. Something bubbled within the orb, and a light slowly built from its center. Owen held the orb up to the furry slug, which crawled closer and rubbed against it. Moments later, Owen grabbed the slug and set it down in a cage at the far end of the lab. Inside the cage was another creature, this one a lot bigger than the furry slug. Leaning over the table, Owen said to the slug, "Kill." For a moment, nothing happened. The other creature, something resembling a dog, growled and approached the slug slowly. Suddenly, the slug's mouth opened wide and engulfed the dog thing's head whole. When the slug pulled away, the other creature's head was gone, its neck spouting blood. There was another dog thing in the cage, but it whimpered in a corner after what happened to its mate. "Good," Owen said. The sun was beating down on Owen when he woke up. People in red t-shirts that said Unstoppable Titans surrounded him. "Are you all right?" a girl asked. It took him a moment to recognize Alyssa. "Yes," he muttered. Chris and Daniel helped him to his feet. His head was aching from where the softball hit him. He had a vague memory of the dream. The furry slug had looked familiar to him. His team helped him back to the dugout and told him to sit the rest of the game out, which he gladly agreed to. It gave him more time to think about what he'd just seen while he was unconscious. He'd seen the orb again. This time it had been activated. And the slug. Its dark furry body reminded Owen of another furry, unidentifiable creature, the one swimming around in a fish tank back at the condo. Owen's close call scared Chris for a moment. Seeing his friend drop like that had not been fun, and he had run over to Owen as fast as he could. For some reason, Chris had automatically blamed himself for the incident, a curse of being a leader, perhaps. And then Owen had started mumbling while unconscious. It was like he was possessed, or having a vivid dream. Chris couldn't even guess what was going on in his friend's head, but he knew he didn't like it. He shook Owen, trying to wake him. After a minute, Owen opened his eyes, and Chris breathed a sigh of relief. As he escorted his injured friend to the dugout, he saw a young woman walking down the path from the parking lot. He left the dugout and met her halfway. "Stephanie, what are you doing here?" She smiled. "I have some friends who play softball over here. They have a game today." She looked happily bewildered, as if trying to make sense of this wonderful coincidence. "What's a terrible turtle?" Chris looked over to one of his opponents in the field. "I have no idea. I think it's a turtle who is terrible." She laughed. "I hope that affects their athletic ability, for your sake." Now it was his turn to laugh. "It isn't today, unfortunately, but we've actually had a pretty bad run the past few seasons." "I'm sorry to hear that." "Thanks." Chris grew serious now. "How are you feeling? Better, I hope." Stephanie touched the bandage on her neck. "I have a headache right now, but I don't feel too terrible. Thank you for asking." She hesitated before adding, "And thank you again for saving my life." "It's what we do." She nodded. "I should get going. The game is about to start. Maybe you and I could do something together sometime? Dinner or a movie?" Chris grinned. He couldn't believe he was being asked out by a girl. "I would like that." She gave him her number and then walked to a field in the far corner of the park. Chris smiled as he returned to his friends. The Unstoppable Titans lost yet again. Daniel constantly joked the reasons for their losses lay in Owen, Chris, and Alyssa. Before they joined the team, the Titans never lost. After the game, they headed back to the condo. When they got there, Owen noticed the dogfish still swimming. "He looks so cramped in that tank," Alyssa said. "There's nothing we can do about that right now," Chris said. "Actually, I think there is." Alyssa and Daniel grabbed the tank and took it to her bathroom, where there was a big tub. She filled the tub with cold water, then dumped the creature into it. The others gathered around her and watched the dogfish swim around happily. "That is just too dang precious," Daniel said, and he actually sounded like he meant it. "I wonder if he's hungry," Alyssa said. "He ate a beer can when we met him," Chris said, standing next to Owen just outside the door. "I don't think I'll be feeding him aluminum today," she said with a smile. Owen could tell Chris was staring at him. He could see Chris out of the corner of his eye, but he didn't acknowledge him. "What's wrong with you?" Chris finally asked. Owen continued looking at the dogfish as it swam around in the water. "Nothing. I just want to know what this thing is. I have a bad feeling about it." He couldn't quite piece it together, but he knew this creature was somehow related to the one in his dream, and that slug had proven to be very dangerous. "You know what?" Alyssa suddenly said as she picked up the creature. "I don't think this guy's getting enough swimming room. I'm going to take him down to the pool." "Hold on," Chris protested. "Are you crazy? People will see." Alyssa gave a sly smile. "Not if we close it down." The 4 Titans and the 1 dogfish crept down to the Olympic-sized pool without encountering a single person. It was relatively early in the day, and the condo still seemed to be asleep. Owen couldn't help but feel how crazy this plan was. Alyssa was carrying the fish in her arms, its bulbous eyes sticking out of the sides of its head. It looked around curiously, occasionally looking up at the girl holding it, seemingly happy. Owen still didn't trust it, however. The pool area could only be accessed by 2 doors, and Alyssa taped handmade signs to them that said, "Closed for maintenance." There was a glass ceiling over the pool, and Owen could see the condo surrounding the area on all sides. It was a dizzying sight, and he had to stop walking in order to keep from tripping over his own feet. Surprisingly enough, in the 2 years he lived here, he never swam in this pool. The Titans were not alone in the swimming area. There was an elderly woman in a navy blue one-piece swimsuit. She was swimming slowly from one end of the pool to the other. "Should we wait for her to finish?" Daniel asked, but Alyssa was already on the move. "Excuse me, miss," she said to the old woman. "I'm afraid we have to close the pool down temporarily for maintenance." "Oh, dear," the woman said as she climbed out. "Is there anything wrong?" "No, we just need to clean it. It should only take an hour or so." The woman nodded, pulling her long, surprisingly thick silver hair from her face. "I do love to swim. Keeps you young, you know." Alyssa nodded and smiled as the woman grabbed a towel and left the swimming area. "All this for a stupid fish monster?" Chris asked, irritated. And in that moment, Owen could have sworn he saw the dogfish give Chris a scathing look. Alyssa dropped the monster into the water, and it immediately began swimming the length of the pool. Owen was impressed by its speed, but was wary of it as well. He was making sure it didn't try to escape, though, if it really wanted to, it would have done so long before now. Owen remained cautious, however. He couldn't get the dream out of his head. He knew the dogfish was somehow related to the furry slug, but despite his protests for a more secure holding cell for the creature while they studied it, Alyssa had insisted upon its minimum security tank. Maybe Owen was wrong about the creature. It hadn't tried to escape since its capture, and it seemed perfectly happy, and dare Owen think, cute, in the pool. But what about the way it attacked him when he and Chris first found it? That hadn't been cute at all. Owen didn't know what to think anymore. There were times when he hated being responsible for his own actions. Sometimes he wished he'd never met Chris and started the monster hunting business. Owen was too young to be killing monsters that looked so much like people. He'd never told Chris about the nightmares he'd had, of all the human faces disappearing to slush with the introduction of stakes to the heart. He was worried it would make Chris feel guilty about dragging him into this life. No, Owen would never tell Chris how he sometimes felt, that they shouldn't be doing what they do. They were living their lives all wrong. Alyssa was getting ready for the party, which was to start half an hour from now. She was wearing blue jeans, a black blouse, and black stilettos. After making sure no one was around, she reached into her desk drawer and brought out some paperwork. Suddenly, Chris walked in, scaring her. She shoved the papers back in her desk. "What were those?" he asked.
"Nothing,"
she said unconvincingly. He stepped closer, eyeing her suspiciously. "You know we don't have secrets around here." She sighed and pulled the papers back out.
"I wanted to keep this a secret until the right time, but I'm opening a homeless shelter."
She showed him the papers. They were documents and building plans.
"I wanted a place for people to go when there was nowhere else for them to turn. Of course, I got the idea after meeting you and Owen. You guys were my inspiration."
Chris looked up and smiled at her. "You truly are an amazing person."
"This I know,"
she said, rolling her eyes, but smiling all the same. "Where is this shelter?"
"It's nearby, on Cooper Street."
"Is it open yet?"
"Not yet," she said, "but I'm hoping it will be very soon."
"Why did you keep it secret?"
"I don't know," she said. "I guess I didn't know how you guys would take it, you and Owen. I was afraid of bringing up old memories."
Chris scoffed. "That's in the past. You helped make our lives better. And now you're going to do the same for other people, and that's great." Alyssa hugged Chris and gave him a kiss on the cheek.
"I love you, Chris Weaver."
"I love me too, and I'm quite fond of you as well."
"How are you feeling?" she asked, rubbing his back. "The bite, I mean."
He shrugged. "I have a headache, but it's not bad. It's probably just from the ass-kicking I got." Alyssa smiled.
"I think Owen's right. Maybe we haven't been fighting vampires. Maybe it's been something else all this time. I think you'll be all right, babe."
Chris said nothing. A few minutes later, she was downstairs, waiting for Daniel. He made his way down the stairs carefully, wearing baggy jeans and a blue and white striped polo shirt.
"Ready, sugar?"
she asked, slinging her colorful purse over her shoulder.
"Yepers."
"You guys be careful," Chris said in a fatherly tone. "I don't want to have to be picking nobody up from jail." Alyssa could already hear the music as they approached David's house half an hour later, and they were still a few streets away. She was excited. She hadn't seen him in a while, and he was one of her best friends. Aside from that, he was also a great source of information. He had been the one who'd given her the heads up about Eric. But that's not why she was here now. She truly wanted to catch up with him. She looked over to Daniel. He was slouched in the passenger seat and didn't look too happy.
"What's wrong?"
she asked. "I'm just not up for a party all of a sudden."
"Is it because of your robot?"
"I just don't get why he won't work. Is it because I'm not smart enough to build something like that?"
"Daniel, the fact you were able to build anything close to that is astonishing. You know you shouldn't beat yourself up over it. Just relax and have fun tonight, then work on it tomorrow. You deserve this break."
With that, Daniel sat up, looking livelier. "You're right. I'm gonna chill out and forget all my worries. Then I'll figure out the problem later."
"Exactly."
She smiled at him. They pulled up to David's house. People were piling in. There were cars lining the street on both sides. The beat of the music was vibrating Alyssa's red SUV. She and Daniel got out and headed into the house with everyone else. The one-story house didn't look so big from the outside, but on the inside, it was like a club. There had to be over 30 people dancing and drinking, and that was just on the inside. Daniel immediately started dancing, despite his cast. Alyssa shook her head and smiled. She'd never seen him dance before. It was cute. Then she saw David across the living room, talking to a few people.
"I'll be right back. Go get yourself a beer and don't tell anybody how old you are,"
she said to Daniel, winking. Alyssa made her way to David, who saw her and waved. He excused himself from the group and met up with her on the back porch.
"Oh my God, you look great. I'm glad you came. How's life treating you?" "As good as can be expected," she said, beaming. "I'm really glad we came too. A break was really what I needed, if you know what I mean."
"We?" David asked, looking around.
"Yeah, I brought Daniel. He definitely needed to get out. He's been stressed lately."
David and Alyssa looked inside the house and saw Daniel grabbing a beer from the fridge. "How old is he?" he asked her.
21,
she lied. Daniel took a sip of beer. It was extremely bitter. He took another, still bitter, but it hit the spot just right. He looked around the room. There were a lot of girls, mostly blondes, although there were a few brunettes. He thought about talking to a few of them, but he wasn't quite confident enough. Maybe after a few more drinks, he thought. "Who are you?" a voice asked from behind Daniel. He turned around and was face to face with a tall guy with shoulder-length red hair. He had on a dark green backpack. "Daniel, I'm 21, he blurted nervously. The redhead glanced at Daniel curiously. "No, you're not." "Busted." "It's okay," the redhead said, leaning closer. "I'm not going to turn you in." He winked at Daniel, and Daniel laughed. He liked this guy. He seemed cool. The redhead gave a friendly smile. "Name's Michael," he said, offering his hand. Daniel shook it and told Michael his name. "You here with anyone?" Michael asked. "Yeah, my friend Alyssa. She's outside talking to the host of the party, though. They're old friends." "I see. So, what is it you do, Daniel?" "Like, for a living?" "Well, nothing really. I'm in a fortunate position where I don't have to work," he explained, taking another sip of beer. "I do build things, though. It's my hobby." "Really?" Michael asked. "What kind of things?" "Well, I built a robot, but it's currently out of service, so to speak." "A robot, you say? Wow, that's quite an accomplishment." "That's what everybody keeps telling me, but a better accomplishment would be building one that works." Daniel was depressed again. "Are you serious?" David asked anxiously.
"Yes,
said Alyssa. She hated herself for mixing business with pleasure again. She had promised herself she wouldn't do that tonight, but it just slipped out. Eric had bitten Chris and Stephanie. She was always letting things slip, and she vowed to work on that in the future. David started looking around nervously. Chris isn't here, is he? Alyssa frowned at him.
No, he's not.
David clearly noticed the tone in her voice. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. How is Chris doing?
He's all right. He's worried he's going to change into whatever Eric is.
What do you mean, whatever Eric is? Isn't he a vampire?
Owen doesn't think so. He thinks he's something else.
That's weird. I mean, he drinks blood. He's not human. What else could he possibly be? Alyssa sat down in a lawn chair, shaking her head. David joined her. They were alone on the porch.
I'm sorry, she began. I promised myself I wasn't going to bring this up. I'm really here to see you and have fun. This whole thing we started just takes over my life sometimes.
David smiled and put his hand on hers. Then quit. Alyssa did a double take. She'd always thought David was supportive of her decision to hunt monsters with her new friends. She thought he'd understood after what had happened to her little sisters, how they'd been killed by what most people had said were snakes. But Alyssa knew they weren't snakes. She'd been the only one to witness it, so she knew better than anyone. Snake-like creatures attacked her sisters, yes, but she knew there was more to them. The creatures had been attached to something, a body, Alyssa had thought at the time. The snakes had to have been tentacles. She was sure of it. It had been a monster. That had been years ago, but she thought of it often. Her birthday had come months later, and her friends had tried to lift her spirits by taking her to a club in downtown San Sebastian. On their way to the club, Alyssa had seen two young men walking down the street. They had stepped to the side to let her and her friends pass. They were handsome, but their clothes had been dirty and torn, as if they'd been in a really bad fight. She assumed they were homeless. That didn't stop her from talking to them after partying with her friends. She'd found them again later on. It turned out they were indeed homeless. One of the guys, the brown-haired one, turned out to be Chris Weaver, the blonde Owen Walters. Alyssa had taken them to a restaurant and bought them something to eat. She knew right away there was something special about them, and to this day, she still didn't understand how she knew it.
I was just wondering, were you guys in a fight or something? She'd asked.
Yeah, Owen said. You can say that.
I'd love to hear about it.
You wouldn't believe us if we told you, Chris said. It was just some stupid guys. Alyssa didn't believe them. They had been fidgety the whole time, casting nervous glances here and there, as if expecting something to lunge out at them. During the time she had spent with them, she kept thinking about the news reports about strange deaths in the city and elsewhere, all the victims drained of blood, macabre stuff. And most of all, she kept thinking about her sisters and the monster that killed them. Why she kept thinking of these things while talking to these boys, she couldn't understand at first.
Tell me the truth, she said. What were you guys really fighting?
Alyssa gave them a knowing smile, and then, without hesitation, told them about the creature that killed her sisters. They'd listened with sympathetic ears, and then they told her about the vampire they'd just fought in an alley a few blocks away. Alyssa had spoken with Chris and Owen for hours about their experiences. They'd encountered 3 vampires in the course of a year. Weeks later, the 3 of them had come to the decision to do something about what appeared to be an infestation. They couldn't be the only people who had encountered monsters. Over the coming months, Alyssa had slowly drifted from her other friends to set off on this adventure with these two handsome strangers. She had moved out of her apartment and bought a bigger place, the condo in the heart of downtown San Sebastian, to act as a base of their operations. Chris and Owen had been grateful for a place to call their home. Alyssa was suddenly brought back to the present by something rubbing against her legs. It was a little gray and white tabby cat.
"That's Toby," said David. "I just got him."
Alyssa picked Toby up and set him down on her lap.
"He's so cute. I love animals."
"I know," David said quickly. "I didn't forget." He smiled. Alyssa smiled back. David was the one friend she could never abandon. He'd been surprisingly supportive of her decisions, unlike the others who questioned her at every turn. The friends Alyssa had always thought would be there for her no matter what were the first to disappear. Suddenly, Alyssa's smile faded. David's support seemed to be dwindling. Hadn't he just tried to persuade her to quit?
"David, you don't understand what we're doing. I can't walk away from it,"
she said, looking down at Toby.
"I won't. I feel like I actually have a purpose in life now. I don't want to lose that."
He nodded, appearing to understand. Alyssa hoped he did. If there was anyone who could, it was him. "How's the homeless shelter coming?" he finally asked after a long silence.
"It's coming along great. It should be ready to open soon."
She had told him about the shelter nearly a year ago. She'd been so excited about it she couldn't keep it in. David knew he'd upset her, and he hated himself for it. But he wanted everything to go back to the way it used to be, the two of them hanging out all the time. And then, inspiration struck. "Unicorn," he suddenly said. For a second, Alyssa just stared at him, uncomprehending. Then a smile formed, getting bigger by the second. And then she laughed so hard it looked like she would die from it.
"I still can't believe you signed that petition," she said, wiping away tears.
"I thought she said unicorn, damn it." He laughed as well. One time, while dining with Alyssa and some friends, David had been confronted by a woman with a clipboard at the entrance of the restaurant. She had been trying to abolish the sale of alcohol in the area, and when she'd mentioned unicards, David had thought she said unicorns and, puzzled by this, signed the petition without further thought.
"What do you have against unicorns?"
Alyssa asked, laughing more. "Nothing, but I like to please people," he said, wiping away his own tears. "She had a clipboard and a pen. I was doomed from the start." The two of them laughed hard for at least 5 minutes, then settled down, and at that moment, David knew he was in love with Alyssa Turner. He really wanted things to go back to the way they used to be, before Owen and Chris. "If you'll excuse me a moment," David said as he stood up. "I have to go to the little boy's room." Les saw this as the perfect opportunity. He jumped in front of David and pulled him to the side before Michael could see them. "What the hell are you doing?" David asked. "Look, man, there's something I have to tell you," Les said nervously. "Who invited you? Because I know I sure as hell didn't," David said. "Listen, it's about that Michael guy you met at the arcade last night." David pried himself from Les's grip. "Dude, you better be gone by the time I'm done taking a leak." And before Les could say another word, David was in the bathroom. Daniel was on his 5th beer. The room was spinning, but he didn't care. He felt great. And he really liked his new friend Michael, who claimed to be on his 9th beer, but seemed completely sober. "You are a freak of nature," Daniel joked. Michael tipped his beer to Daniel and laughed. Daniel couldn't help but notice Michael constantly scanning the living room as if he were looking for someone. David opened the bathroom door and peered out. Les Huntington was gone, but now someone else was walking up to him. It was Curtis Merriman, and he looked worried. "Have you seen Marco?" he asked David. "No. Why?" "I haven't heard from him at all since last night at the arcade. Remember? He was talking to that redhead. Do you think Marco got his butt kicked or something?" David stood there for a moment. Hadn't Les just mentioned something about Michael in the arcade? The last time David saw Marco, he had been having a heated discussion with the weird redhead. Did Michael do something to Marco? It was almost unthinkable, considering how tough Marco was. But no one had seen him since that night. What could that mean?